Hi, I'm Jayne Jennings. I'm delighted to be exhibiting in this powerful exhibit at the Museum of Arts and Sciences. The title, The Healing Power of Art, is very apropos for this tumultuous time that we're living in. And I'm a firm believer how healing the process of creating is and how healing the process of viewing art is. If you're not an artist, and I've heard many people tell me that they can't draw stick figures, I'm here to say go get a coloring book and some markers and have at it, because this is the time that you need to start working on this art therapy to heal yourself. I'd like to begin by talking about these two pieces that are in the show that are an example of how I transformed my style from using Indonesian Batik fabrics, this is one of my earlier pieces, to printing my own digitally manipulated photographs on cotton and silk organza. Many people in the community remember me for my work in hand-formed paper. For many years I used wet cotton pulp that I dyed and transformed them into sculptural material. But it became very wet and messy in my studio, and I got tired of that. So I decided to start working in dry cotton instead of wet cotton. Started experimenting with fabric, which in the art world is called fiber. And I began creating these fiber assemblages. They're more like art quilt pieces, but they're in box forms, and the fabric is actually fused onto the box form in a permanent way. So my earlier pieces in hand-dyed Indonesian cotton batiks, this is an example of one. The batiks are amazing. I was drawn to them because of the richness, the luminosity, and the variety of patterns and colors available to me. But I got to a point where there were times when I couldn't find the shade that I needed or the pattern that I needed for a particular application. And I thought to myself, well, what if I started using my own photographs? And then I would have a lot more control over the value, which is the lightness or darkness of the fabric in the application that I needed it for. So I started taking photographs like crazy. I began using double images, which was really fascinating to me. And I also began taking a lot of photos of shadow forms, human shadow forms. It really intrigued me a lot because of the movement in the shadows. They were faceless forms, which appealed to me because when people don't identify with them as a person or an expression, they were more like forms with soft edges, and compositionally they were really fascinating. So I began that transition. I have a wide format printer. I began printing the cotton and silk on the wide format printer, and this is the kind of thing that emerged from that. This is one of my earlier pieces. You can see, for example, in this top portion, how the silk is layered on top of the previous photograph. There's the background of the trees here is lighter than this foreground. That's a layering effect. And there are some grasses here at the top to create a little bit more interest and texture. I like using vegetation in my pieces as a textural element. This is an example of the shadow form. This is actually me. And when I print this on silk, it has to be, the saturation has to be increased because the ink from the printer actually goes through the silk. And then to create some dimension, I put it on a piece of wood to bring it out, give it an airy feeling. And I really love how, if you're passing by, the wind, the air currents in the room will move this. It's kind of unique. And then I also I curled the edges of this to help this top top piece stand out more. And this is another image. This is marsh grasses that are, it's a double exposure with the marsh grasses going vertically and then another one horizontally. Creates an interesting pattern, kind of a natural material pattern. So that's pretty interesting, and I really like using the Epson printer because the inks are archival pigmented inks, which are permanent, and I use fusible material, which adheres by heat, adheres the cotton and silk organza onto the box form, creating a long-lasting product. The inspiration for this piece, it's called the Shadow Caster. This piece symbolically to me seems appropriate for this time during the pandemic when we're isolated from friends and oftentimes family members, and the standing figure alone is an example of the loneliness and the depth of separation from others that it's become so difficult for so many. I like to use people in my artwork, and I also like to use found objects in my pieces because they convey a message. I like to incorporate some humor sometimes in my work. It's kind of fun. I like to make statements on social issues. This piece over here is not about social issues, but I do love birds, and I'm very tied to nature. So the bird is an example for me of the only creature that lives between heaven and earth. So it's kind of a spiritual element to me, and I use birds as symbols in a lot of my work, particularly the found object pieces, the sculptures. You might have a tiny bird concealed somewhere, or a large bird.